You're too fat for any decent man. Marry the dirt farmer and get out of our sight." 19-year-old Maple's own stepmother spat these words while throwing a too small wedding dress at her feet. They were shipping her off to marry a poor farmer as punishment for embarrassing the family. Called her worthless, treated her like trash, sold her off to get rid of their problem. But what her cruel family didn't know, this broke farmer owned thousands of silver mines and was one of the richest men alive. Their punishment was about to become Maple's greatest blessing. Before we dive in, smash that like button and comment where you're watching from. The wedding dress hit the floor with a cruel whisper of silk, landing at Maple Hartwell's feet like a slap across her face. She stared down at it, her hands shaking as the reality crashed over her in waves of pure horror. Size 6. The dress was a size 6. "Pick it up," Vivian commanded from across the grand living room, her voice sharp as winter ice. "You'll need to squeeze into it somehow for tomorrow." Maple's stepmother stood beside the marble fireplace like a queen, delivering judgment, her thin frame draped in expensive purple silk that made her look even more skeletal than usual. Behind her, father sat at his mahogany desk, counting money with careful fingers, refusing to meet Maple's eyes. "Tomorrow?" Maple's voice came out as a whisper. "What do you mean tomorrow?" Vivian's smile was razor thin. "Your wedding day, dear." To Ezra Blackwood, a poor dirt farmer from the hills, perfect match for someone who can't control herself around food. The words struck like physical blows. Maple's breath caught in her throat as she looked around the room desperately, searching for any sign this was some cruel joke. But her stepsister Dahlia lounged on the velvet sofa, painting her nails blood red and smirking with obvious delight. "But I don't even know him," Maple managed, her voice breaking on every word. "I've never met this man." "How can you?" "Should have thought about that before embarrassing our family at every social event," Vivian interrupted, her pale eyes glittering with satisfaction. "Mrs. Henderson's garden party last week was the final straw. The way you devoured that entire dessert table while everyone watched in disgust." Heat flooded Maple's cheeks. She remembered that day, how hungry she'd been after skipping breakfast because Vivian said her dress looked tight. How the other women had whispered and pointed when she'd taken a second piece of cake. She started. "You were just proving what everyone already knows." Dahlia chimed in without looking up from her nails. "That you're a pig who brings shame to this family." The casual cruelty in her stepsister's voice made Maple's stomach twist. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how her blue dress pulled across her middle, how her soft arms looked next to Dahlia's stick-thin ones. "The arrangements are already made," father said finally, still not looking at her. His voice sounded tired, like discussing her future was just another tedious business transaction. Blackwood needed a wife. We needed to solve a problem. A problem. That's all she was to them. 19 years old, and she was just a problem to be solved by shipping her off to some stranger in the mountains. "At least this way, you'll be someone else's burden," Vivian added, walking to the window and gazing out at their perfectly manicured gardens. "Poor as dirt, but what else could we expect? No respectable man would—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The words hung in the air anyway. "No respectable man would want you." Maple bent down on trembling legs and picked up the wedding dress, the silk feeling like ice against her sweating palms. The dress was beautiful, cream-colored with tiny pearl buttons and delicate lace. It would have been perfect for someone like Dahlia, for someone thin, someone worthy. "The wagon comes at dawn," Vivian said, turning back to face her. "Pike will drive you up to the mountains. Don't pack much, farmers don't have room for luxuries." "This is my home," Maple whispered, clutching the dress to her chest. "I was born here. Mother loved this place." The mention of her real mother made Vivian's face twist with anger. "Your mother is dead, girl. Has been for 10 years. This is my home now, and I decide what's best for this family." The dismissal in her voice was final, absolute. Maple looked once more at her father, hoping for some sign of regret, some hint that he still loved the little girl who used to sit on his lap while he read the newspaper. But Richard Hartwell kept counting his money, stack after stack of crisp bills that seemed more important than his daughter's future. Something hard and cold settled in Maple's chest then. Not quite anger, she was too hurt for anger yet. But something else, something that made her spine straighten despite the weight of humiliation crushing down on her. They thought they were destroying her, throwing her away like yesterday's garbage, sending her off to some poor mountain farmer who would be grateful for any wife, even a fat one. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. Maple turned toward the stairs, still clutching the too small dress, her footsteps steady despite her shaking hands. Tomorrow would change everything for all of them. She just didn't know how much yet. Dawn came too soon, grey and cold like everything else in Maple's life. She stood at her bedroom window watching Pike load her single trunk onto his rickety wagon with all the care of someone handling garbage. Her few belongings looked pitiful bouncing around in the wagon bed, a handful of dresses, her mother's jewelry box and the books Vivian said were too heavy to take. The wedding dress hung on her like a cruel joke. The kitchen maid, Sarah, had let out the seams as much as possible during the night, but it still pulled tight across Maple's chest and hips. At least it was better than the original size 6 night. "Stop fussing with it," Vivian snapped from the doorway. "It's not like anyone will be looking anyway." Maple's hands dropped to her sides. Through the window she could see Pike spitting tobacco juice into the dirt, clearly annoyed about having to make the long journey into the mountains. His wagon was the kind used for hauling feed and supplies, not people. There was no cushioned seat, no protection from the sun or rain. They really were treating her like cargo. "Remember," Vivian continued, stepping into the room, "you represent this family now. Try not to embarrass us any more than you already have." The hypocrisy made Maple's jaw clench. They were shipping her off to a stranger because she embarrassed them, but somehow she was still supposed to represent them proudly. "What if he's cruel?" Maple asked quietly. "What if he hurts me?" For just a moment something flickered across Vivian's face, but it passed so quickly Maple wondered if she'd imagined it. "Then you'll learn to deal with it, just like the rest of us," Vivian said coldly. "Now come. Pike won't wait all day." The goodbye was worse than Maple had expected. Father stood on the front steps, finally looking at her with what might have been regret in his eyes. But when she moved toward him hoping for one last hug, he stepped back and cleared his throat. Be good to your husband," he said awkwardly. "Try to make the best of things." Dahlia didn't even come outside. She waved from the parlor window, already dressed for another social event that Maple would never attend again. Pike helped her up onto the hard wooden seat with a grunt. "Long ride ahead," he said, chewing his tobacco. "Best settle in." As the wagon lurched forward, Maple turned back to look at the only home she'd ever known. The white columns gleamed in the morning sun, the gardens her mother had planted still blooming beautiful and bright. She tried to memorize every detail, knowing she might never see it again. The ride grew rougher as they left the smooth city roads behind. Pike wasn't much for conversation, answering her few questions with grunts or single words. The landscape changed from manicured estates to wild countryside, then to rolling hills that grew steeper with each mile. After hours of bouncing on the hard seat, Maple's back ached and her stomach churned with nerves. The wedding dress, already uncomfortable, now stuck to her skin with sweat. She tried to imagine what Ezra Blackwood would look like, but all she could picture was someone as harsh and unwelcoming as the rocky terrain around them. "How much farther?" she asked as they climbed another steep hill. Getting close, Pike said, then pointed ahead. See that broken fence? That's where Blackwood Land starts. Maple's heart sank. The fence was falling down, held together with rope and rusty wire. Beyond it she could see overgrown fields and what looked like abandoned farm equipment scattered around like forgotten toys. This was going to be her new life. Poverty and isolation, married to a man who was probably desperate enough to take any wife, even one no one else wanted. They passed more signs of neglect, a collapsed barn, a broken windmill, tools left out to rust in the weather. Everything spoke of someone who was either too poor or too careless to maintain his property. Finally, Pike stopped at a crooked mailbox that read E. Blackwood in faded paint. He jerked his thumb toward a dirt path that disappeared into thick woods. End of the line, he said, already climbing down to unload her trunk. Path leads to his place. Maple stared at the narrow trail winding between tall pine trees. It looked like something from a fairy tale, the dark kind where girls disappeared forever. "You're not coming with me?" she asked, panic rising in her throat. Pike shook his head, dumping her trunk beside the mailbox with a thud. "My job was to get you here. Rest is up to you." Within minutes he was gone, leaving Maple alone beside the crooked mailbox with nothing but her trunk and her growing fear. The silence was complete except for her own ragged breathing and the distant sound of something moving in the woods. Something that didn't sound quite like any animal she knew. Maple gripped the handle of her trunk and started down the narrow path, her heart hammering against her ribs. The wedding dress caught on every branch and thorn, tearing small holes in the delicate fabric. Each step took her deeper into the woods, away from any hope of escape. The strange sounds grew louder as she walked, metallic clanking mixed with voices she couldn't quite make out. Her imagination ran wild with possibilities, none of them good. Maybe Ezra Blackwood wasn't just poor. Maybe he was dangerous too. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the path opened into a small clearing. Maple stopped dead, blinking in surprise. The cabin before her was modest but well built, with a stone chimney sending up a curl of white smoke. The windows were clean, the porch swept, and flowers bloomed in neat boxes beneath the sills. This wasn't the ramshackle hovel she'd expected from the broken fences along the road. But she barely noticed the house because her attention was captured by the man chopping wood nearby. Ezra Blackwood was nothing like she'd imagined. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair gleaming with sweat as he brought the axe down in smooth, powerful strokes. When he looked up at her approach, she saw kind amber eyes in a face that was handsome in a rugged, honest way. His clothes were simple work clothes, but they were clean and well-mended. Most shocking of all, when he saw her, he didn't look disgusted or disappointed. He looked surprised, maybe even pleased. "You must be Maple," he said, setting down his axe and wiping his hands on a clean cloth. His voice was deep and gentle, nothing like Pike's gruff growl or her father's cold dismissal. "I'm Ezra. I'm sorry about the circumstances." The kindness in his tone almost broke her. After the cruelty of the morning, after years of criticism and contempt, basic human decency felt like a miracle. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Ezra continued, approaching slowly like she was a frightened animal that might bolt. "But I promise you'll be safe here. You can have the cabin. I'll sleep in the barn until you're comfortable, until you decide what you want to do." Maple stared at him, struggling to understand. This gentle giant was offering to sleep in the barn, to give her time to decide what she wanted. When had anyone ever cared what she wanted? "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you agree to this marriage? They must have told you what I am." Ezra's expression grew sad. "They told me you were unwanted, that you brought shame to your family. But looking at you now," he shook his head, I think they're the ones who should be ashamed." The words hit her like a physical blow, but a good kind of blow, like cool water on burned skin. No one had ever defended her before, not ever. "I don't understand," she said, tears threatening to spill over. "You seem kind. You could probably find a real wife, someone beautiful." "Stop." Ezra's voice was firm but not harsh. "Don't talk about yourself that way. You are real, and you are beautiful." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Maple covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by kindness she didn't know how to accept. She felt Ezra's gentle hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you inside. You must be tired from the journey," as he led her toward the cabin. Maple noticed things that didn't quite fit with the story of a poor farmer. The tools scattered around the yard looked expensive and well-maintained. There was a quality to the cabin's construction that spoke of careful craftsmanship, not desperate poverty. And there was something else. Those mysterious sounds she'd heard from the woods seemed to be coming from somewhere beyond the cabin, deeper in the forest. "What do you do here?" she asked, as Ezra picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. "Besides farming, I mean." For just a moment, his step faltered. When he looked at her, there was something complex in his expression, not exactly guilt, but something close to it. "I work the land," he said carefully. "There are opportunities in these mountains for a man willing to work hard." It wasn't really an answer, but before Maple could ask more questions, they reached the cabin's front door. Ezra set down her trunk and turned to face her fully. "Maple," he said, his amber eyes serious. "There are things about this situation that you don't know yet. Things that might change how you see everything. But right now, you need rest and food and time to feel safe. The explanations can wait." Something in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear, exactly, but anticipation. Like he was holding secrets that might actually be good news for once. "What kind of things?" she asked. Before Ezra could answer, that metallic sound echoed from the woods again, louder this time. And with it came voices, men calling back and forth in words she couldn't quite make out. Ezra's entire demeanor changed. His eyes sharpened, and he tilted his head like he was listening for something important. When he looked back at her, there was an intensity there that made her breath catch. "The kind of things," he said quietly, "that might make you realize this marriage isn't the punishment your family thinks it is." The next 3 days passed like a dream. Maple was afraid to wake up from. Each morning, she opened her eyes expecting the nightmare to begin. Cruel words, disgusted looks, the constant reminder that she was a bird. Instead, she found fresh wildflowers on her windowsill, and the smell of breakfast cooking outside. Ezra kept his promise about sleeping in the barn, but he was never far away. He brought her meals without comment about how much she ate or didn't eat. When she barely touched her first dinner, too nervous to swallow, he simply said, "The mountain air takes getting used to. Eat when you're ready." No judgment, no criticism, just quiet understanding. On the second day, he fixed the cabin's leaky roof without being asked. Maple watched from the window as he worked, noting how his movements were sure and practiced. These weren't the desperate repairs of a poor man. This was skilled craftsmanship. "You don't have to do that," she called up to him during a break. Ezra smiled down at her, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Can't have my wife getting rained on," he said simply. The word wife should have sounded strange, even frightening. Instead, it made something warm flutter in her chest. But the mysteries kept growing. That afternoon, while Ezra was away doing whatever mysterious work kept him busy, Maple saw riders approaching through the trees. 3 men on fine horses, wearing expensive clothes that would have fit right in at her father's social gatherings. She ducked behind the curtains and watched as they spoke with Ezra in hushed, urgent tones. One of them handed him a leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. They spoke for maybe 10 minutes before riding away as quickly as they'd come. When Ezra returned to the cabin, Maple was stirring soup at the stove, trying to look like she hadn't been spying. "Good soup," he said, accepting the bowl she offered. "Who were those men?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Ezra's hand paused halfway to his mouth. "Business associates," he said carefully. "Nothing for you to worry about." But the way he said it made her worry more, not less. The third day brought more strange visitors, a man in a fine black suit who looked like a banker, and later two rough-looking fellows who reminded Maple of the men her father hired for questionable tasks. Each time, Ezra spoke with them away from the cabin, always returning with that same carefully neutral expression. Yet his kindness to her never wavered. When she struggled to reach something on a high shelf, he built her a little step stool. When she mentioned missing her mother's garden, he started clearing a patch of earth behind the cabin for her to plant whatever she wanted. "You don't have to do all this," Maple said as she watched him pull weeds with patient determination. "I want to," Ezra replied, not looking up from his work. "You deserve to have beautiful things around you." The simple statement hit her like a lightning bolt. She deserved beautiful things. According to who? Her family had spent years convincing her she deserved nothing but criticism and shame. That evening, they sat on the cabin's small porch as the sun set behind the mountains. It was the first time Maple had felt truly peaceful in years. No one was watching her eat, judging her appearance, or reminding her of her failures. "Can I ask you something?" she said as fireflies began to dance in the gathering darkness. "Anything," Ezra said. "Why did you really agree to this marriage? And don't say it was for land rights or some business arrangement. I can tell you're not the desperate farmer my family described." Ezra was quiet for so long that Maple thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and thoughtful. "I've been alone for a long time," he said. "Not because I had to be, but because I was waiting for the right person. Someone kind. Someone genuine. Someone who knew what it felt like to be underestimated." He turned to look at her, his amber eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "When I heard about your situation, how your family was treating you, I knew I had to do something, not because I needed a wife, but because you deserved better than what they were offering you." Maple's throat tightened with emotion. "You married me out of pity?" "No," Ezra said firmly. "I married you because in the few letters we exchanged before you came here, I could see your strength, your intelligence, your heart. Your family might think they were getting rid of a problem, but I knew I was gaining something precious." "We exchanged letters?" Maple asked, confused. "I never wrote you any letters." Ezra's expression grew complicated. "There's a lot about this arrangement that wasn't what it seemed, Maple. Your family, they weren't the only ones involved in bringing us together." Before she could ask what he meant, those mysterious sounds echoed from the forest again, closer this time, and clearly mechanical. Metal on stone, wheels turning, voices calling instructions. Ezra tensed, listening intently. In the distance, Maple could see torches moving between the trees, casting dancing shadows that looked almost like a parade. "What is that?" she whispered. Ezra stood up, his hand reaching out to help her to her feet. "Something I should have explained before now," he said. "Something that's going to change everything you think you know about why you're here." The torches were getting closer, and with them came the sound of many voices, the creak of wagon wheels, and something else, something that sounded like celebration. "Ezra," Maple said, her heart beginning to race. "What aren't you telling me?" He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes reflecting both apology and anticipation. "That your family didn't just marry you off to get rid of you, Maple. They married you to the wrong man for all the right reasons, and they have no idea what they've actually done." Before Maple could ask what Ezra meant, a hand clamped gently over her mouth from behind. Her heart jumped, but Ezra's calm voice immediately soothed her panic. "It's all right," he whispered, his other arm coming around her waist to steady her. "But we need to be very quiet right now." Through the trees, the torches were moving in organized patterns, and Maple could hear men calling out numbers and directions. It sounded like some kind of work operation, but at night, in the middle of the wilderness, Ezra guided her silently back into the cabin and closed the door softly. Only then did he remove his hand from her mouth. "I can explain," he said quietly, "but not yet. Please trust me just a little longer." Looking into his amber eyes, seeing the genuine worry there, not for himself but for her, Maple found that she did trust him. After only 3 days, she trusted this man more than she'd ever trusted her own family. "I won't ask questions," he whispered back. "But I'm not stupid, Ezra. Whatever's happening out there, it's not farming." He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. "No," he agreed, "it's not farming." The next few weeks fell into a strange but wonderful routine. Days were filled with simple domestic pleasures, cooking together, working in the garden Ezra had prepared, talking for hours about books and dreams, and everything except the mysterious nighttime activities that continued in the forest. Maple found herself falling in love, not just with Ezra's kindness, but with the man himself. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, like her thoughts mattered. The way he laughed at her jokes, even the silly ones. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, with an expression of wonder that made her feel beautiful for the first time in her life. And Ezra seemed to feel the same way. Their conversations grew longer, their comfortable silences deeper. He told her about his childhood in these mountains, about dreams he'd had and fears he'd conquered, everything except what he did during those mysterious disappearances, and why wealthy strangers kept visiting their remote cabin. The physical attraction was growing too, despite Maple's years of believing no one could ever want her that way. When Ezra helped her reach something high, his hand would linger on her waist. When they passed each other in the small cabin, he would brush her arm gently, sending shivers through her whole body. One evening, while organizing some of Ezra's belongings to make more room for her things, Maple found a letter that made her blood run cold. It was addressed to E. Blackwood, owner and operator, Sunset Mining Consortium. Owner and operator? Of what? Mining? Her hands trembling, she read the first few lines before footsteps on the porch made her quickly fold the letter and put it back where she'd found it. "Find everything you need?" Ezra asked as he came through the door, his arms full of fresh firewood. "Yes," Maple said, her voice sounding strained even to her own ears. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. Questions swirled through her mind like a storm. If Ezra owned some kind of mining operation, why live in this simple cabin? Why let her family believe he was desperately poor? And what exactly was he mining that required all this secrecy? That night, she lay awake listening to the now familiar sounds from the forest. The rolling of heavy wheels, the calls of working men, the distant ring of metal on stone. It sounded like a major operation, not the small-scale farming or hunting she'd assumed. 2 more days passed before Maple's curiosity overcame her promise not to ask questions. She waited until Ezra was working in the garden, his back turned to the cabin, then slipped out and followed the path the mysterious visitors always used. The sounds grew louder as she crept through the trees, her heart pounding with each step. Finally, she reached a ridge overlooking a cleared valley, and what she saw made her gasp out loud. Below her stretched the largest mining operation she'd ever seen or imagined. Dozens of men worked with professional equipment, loading wagons with ore that glittered even in the afternoon sunlight. Steam-powered machinery moved massive amounts of earth and rock. Neat rows of buildings housed what looked like offices and storage facilities. This wasn't some small, struggling mine. This was a major industrial operation worth more money than Maple could even imagine. And supervising it all, directing workers and examining equipment with the authority of someone completely in charge, was her supposedly poor farmer husband. "I was wondering when you'd follow the sounds," a gentle voice said behind her. Maple spun around to find Ezra standing there, his expression a mixture of regret and relief. He didn't look angry that she'd discovered his secret. He looked like a man who was tired of keeping secrets from someone he loved. "This is what you do," she said, gesturing at the massive operation below. "This is your real work." "One of them," Ezra confirmed, moving to stand beside her at the ridge. "Maple, I own 47 silver mines across 4 territories, 3 ore processing facilities, transport contracts with every major mining operation west of the Mississippi." The words hit her like physical blows. 47 mines, processing facilities. Her poor farmer husband was talking about an empire. "Then why," she whispered, "why live in that little cabin? Why let my family think you were desperate? Why agree to marry someone they considered worthless?" Ezra turned to face her fully, his amber eyes intense with emotion. "Because," he said softly, "I didn't need their money, or their connections, or their approval. I needed you." Before she could ask what he meant, shouts echoed from the mining operation below. Men were pointing at the ridge where they stood, and several were already climbing toward them. "We need to go," Ezra said urgently, taking her hand. "There are things about this situation, about your family's involvement, that you still don't know. And some of those things are dangerous." As they hurried back toward the cabin, Maple's mind reeled with questions. But one thought kept rising above all the others. Her family had married her off to a man worth more than they could ever dream of being. And they had no idea what they'd done. 3 days later, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the peaceful morning like breaking glass. Maple looked up from the wildflowers she was planting in her new garden to see riders approaching through the trees, and her blood turned to ice when she recognized them. Vivian sat rigid on a black mare, her traveling dress wrinkled and dusty. Behind her rode Richard, looking older and more haggard than Maple remembered. Their eyes held the desperate gleam of people who had lost everything and were making one final dangerous gamble. "Please," Vivian called out as they dismounted, her voice stripped of its usual commanding tone. "I need to speak with my stepdaughter. It's urgent. A family emergency." The word stepdaughter sounded strange in Vivian's mouth, almost like she was tasting something bitter. Maple had never heard anything but coldness from her before, but now there was something else, fear, maybe even panic. Ezra emerged from the cabin, moving to stand protectively beside Maple. His easy smile was gone, replaced by the alert expression of a man ready for trouble. "We need you to come home," Richard said without any greeting or preteens of warmth. "The family business is failing. We made some poor investments. We need your help." Maple stared at them in disbelief. After years of being told she was worthless, after being shipped off like unwanted cargo, they wanted her help. "My help," she said, her voice sharper than she'd ever dared use with them before. "You threw me away like garbage. You said I was an embarrassment to the family name." "We were wrong," Vivian said, the words clearly painful to speak. "We need you to use your connection with your husband here to help us." The way she said "your husband here" made Maple's skin crawl. There was something calculating in Vivian's eyes despite her obvious desperation, like she knew something Maple didn't. "She's not going anywhere with you," Ezra said firmly, stepping closer to Maple. "You don't understand," Richard snapped, his desperation making him bolder than usual. "We know who you are, Blackwood. We know about your business ventures. We know what you really owe." The words hung in the air like a threat. Maple looked between her family and her husband, realizing that everyone in this conversation knew something crucial, except her. "What business ventures?" Maple asked quietly, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. The silence stretched until Vivian broke it with a bitter laugh that held no humor at all. "You really don't know, do you?" she said, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "Your precious poor farmer husband owns silver mines, Maple. Dozens of them. Your desperate husband is one of the wealthiest men in the territory." Even though Maple had suspected this after seeing the mining operation, hearing it confirmed so bluntly still hit her like a physical blow. She turned to Ezra, searching his face for some explanation that would make sense of everything. His expression told her that Vivian's words were true, but there was something else there. Anger at having his secret revealed this way, and worry about how Maple would react. "How long have you known?" Maple asked her stepfamily. "We found out 3 days ago," Richard admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "A business associate told us about Ezra Blackwood's mining empire. We realized we'd made a terrible mistake." "You mean you realized you could have asked for more money?" Ezra said coldly. Vivian's face flushed red. "We could have negotiated a better arrangement if we'd known the truth. Instead, we practically gave away our most valuable—" "Don't you dare call her valuable now," Ezra interrupted, his voice like steel. "You treated her like she was worthless. You can't change that because you discovered I have money." "But legally she's still our family," Richard said desperately, "and marriage creates certain financial obligations between families. Surely we can work something out." Maple watched this exchange with growing amazement. Her family wasn't here because they missed her or realized they'd been cruel. They were here because they wanted access to Ezra's wealth through her. "Get off my property," Ezra said quietly, but his voice carried absolute authority. "Now." "You can't just," Vivian started. "I can, and I am." Ezra cut her off. "Maple is my wife now. She makes her own decisions about who she wants in her life." For the first time since they'd arrived, all eyes turned to Maple. She felt the weight of the moment, the power to choose her own path for the first time in her life. "I want you to leave," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You had your chance to treat me like family, and you chose cruelty instead. I won't be your solution now just because you need money." Vivian's face twisted with rage and frustration. "You ungrateful little—" "Enough," Ezra said sharply. "The lady has spoken. You're trespassing now." But as Richard and Vivian reluctantly mounted their horses, Vivian called back one more poisonous comment. "Enjoy your fairy tale while it lasts, Maple. But ask yourself, why would a man with dozens of mines and more money than God agree to marry a fat girl from a family he'd never met? What does he really want from you?" The words were designed to plant seeds of doubt, and Maple felt them take root despite herself. As her family rode away, she found herself looking at Ezra with new questions in her eyes. "She's trying to hurt you," Ezra said gently, clearly seeing her confusion. "Don't let her poison what we have." "But she's not wrong to ask the question," Maple said quietly. "Why did you marry me, Ezra? Really? You could have married anyone, someone beautiful, someone from a wealthy family, someone who could help your business." Ezra's face grew serious. He took her hands in his amber eyes intense with emotion. "Because I've been looking for you my whole life," he said simply. "Not someone like you. You specifically. And there are things about how we met, about your family's approach to me, that you still don't understand." Before Maple could ask what he meant, the sound of more approaching horses made them both turn. But these weren't her family returning. These were armed men wearing official badges, and they looked like they meant business. Ezra Blackwood, the lead rider, called out, "You're under arrest for illegal mining operations and tax evasion." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing her father and stepmother emerge from behind the trees, wearing expressions of smug satisfaction. They hadn't left at all. They'd been waiting with these men, planning this ambush all along. The betrayal hit Maple like a physical blow. Her own family had used her as bait, pretending to leave while they waited with armed men to trap the man she loved. The cruelty of it took her breath away. Ezra Blackwood, the lead officer, announced, dismounting with official papers in hand, "You're under arrest for illegal mining operations and tax evasion." But Ezra didn't look worried. If anything, he looked angry. Angrier than Maple had ever seen him. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority she'd never heard before. "I assume you have warrants for those mines you're claiming are illegal?" he asked calmly, his eyes never leaving the officer's face. The officer hesitated, shuffling through his papers with less confidence than he'd shown moments before. That hesitation told Maple everything. This arrest wasn't as legitimate as it appeared. "The thing about mining claims," Ezra continued, his voice steady and sure, "is that they require proper documentation, legal surveys, government approval." He reached inside his shirt and pulled out a leather folder. "All of which I have." The documents he spread out made the officer's face go pale. Maple caught glimpses of official seals, signatures and stamps that looked far more legitimate than whatever papers the lawmen carried. "As for tax evasion," Ezra said, producing another set of papers, "I believe you'll find my tax payments are not only current, but generate substantial revenue for the territorial government, more than most operations combined." Richard stepped forward, his face red with frustration. "Those documents could be forgeries. You can't. Are you suggesting I would forge United States government documents?" Ezra interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because that's a very serious accusation to make against a man whose business provides jobs for half the territory." The officer was clearly having second thoughts, but Vivian wasn't finished. She stepped forward with the calculating smile Maple knew meant trouble. "Documents or not," she said smoothly, "there's still the matter of the marriage contract."
"Our family entered into this arrangement under false pretenses."
"We were told he was a poor farmer, not a mining magnate. That makes the entire marriage agreement fraudulent." Maple's heart stopped. Could they really void her marriage? Take away the only happiness she'd ever found? But Ezra's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked almost amused. "The marriage contract," he said slowly, reaching into his coat again. "Yes, let's discuss that." He pulled out a document that made Vivian's confident smile falter. As he unfolded it, Maple could see it was much more detailed than the simple papers she remembered signing. "This is the real marriage contract," Ezra said, his voice carrying clearly to everyone present. "The one your family signed without reading carefully. The one that makes very interesting provisions about property rights and financial obligations." Richard snatched the document, his eyes scanning it frantically. As he read, his face went from red to white to a sickly green color. "This can't be legal," he whispered. "Oh, but it is," Ezra replied calmly. "You see, when you approached me about marrying your stepdaughter, you were so eager to get rid of her that you signed whatever I put in front of you. You never asked about my finances, my properties, or my legal obligations." Vivian grabbed the contract from Richard's shaking hands. As she read, her voice became a shriek of rage. "This says that upon marriage, all debts and financial obligations of the bride's family become the responsibility of the husband. You're claiming ownership of our debts." "Not claiming," Ezra corrected gently. "I already own them. I bought your outstanding loans 3 days ago. Every mortgage, every gambling debt, every unpaid bill. You now owe me everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Maple stared at her husband in amazement, finally understanding the full scope of what had happened. Her family hadn't just married her off to get rid of her, they'd unknowingly sold themselves into financial slavery to do it. But more importantly, Ezra continued, turning to face Maple with gentle eyes, this contract establishes something else. Maple, as my wife, you're not just connected to my mining operations, you're an equal owner in everything I possess. Every mine, every processing facility, every business contract. It's all jointly ours. The revelation hit Maple like lightning. She wasn't just married to a wealthy man, she was a wealthy woman in her own right. Everything her family had tried to take from her, they'd actually given her in abundance. You see, Ezra said, addressing the confused lawmen, my wife here is now one of the wealthiest women in the territory. And attacking her family, even if they deserve it, wouldn't be good for anyone's business interests. The officer looked between the official documents, the increasingly panicked family, and the man who clearly had far more power than anyone had realized. Sir, he said carefully, these documents appear to be in order. Perhaps we should return to town and review the situation. But before anyone could move, the sound of gunfire echoed from the forest. Not the distant sounds of mining work, but close, sharp cracks that made everyone dive for cover. Nobody move, a female voice screamed from the tree line. Maple's blood turned to ice as Delia emerged from the woods, flanked by 3 rough-looking men with rifles. Her stepsister's face was twisted with rage and desperation. We're taking control of this situation, Dahlia shrieked, her voice shrill with excitement. If we can't get the money legally, we'll take it by force. But her plan immediately went wrong. The territory officers, realizing they were caught in the middle of what looked like a kidnapping attempt, drew their own weapons. The peaceful cabin clearing suddenly became a battlefield with bullets flying and everyone scrambling for cover. Ezra reacted with the quick thinking of someone accustomed to danger, pulling Maple behind the cabin's thick log walls just as gunfire erupted around them. In the chaos of shouting men and ricocheting bullets, he finally told her everything. Your family approached me 6 months ago, he said urgently as shots rang out outside. They offered you in marriage in exchange for money to pay their debts. But when I investigated them, when I learned how they treated you, everything changed. Maple's heart pounded, not just from fear but from the intensity in his voice. I could have married anyone for business reasons, Ezra continued. Any local family's daughter would have served the same legal purposes. But I chose you because they were throwing away something precious, and I wanted to give you the life you deserved. The confession was interrupted by Dahlia's voice calling from outside. Send out the rich man and his fat wife, or we start burning buildings. Maple flinched at the familiar cruelty, but Ezra's expression turned thunderous. No one talks about my wife that way, he said with quiet menace that made Maple's heart skip. Through the cabin window, she could see the standoff continuing. The territorial officers seemed to be siding with Ezra now, apparently convinced that whatever this situation was, it wasn't about illegal mining. There's something else, Ezra said, checking a rifle he'd pulled from beneath their bed. Something that's going to change everything you think you know about your family, your past, and why we really met. Before Ezra could explain what he meant, an explosion rocked the cabin. The blast shattered windows and sent splinters flying through the air. When the smoke cleared, a figure stood in the doorway that made Maple's world tilt completely off its axis. Hello, my darling daughter, said a woman Maple had believed dead for 10 years. Elena Hartwell stepped through the smoke and debris as chaos continued outside, looking nothing like the frail, sickly woman from Maple's childhood memories. She was healthy, confident, and wearing expensive clothes that spoke of wealth and power. You're dead, Maple whispered, her legs giving out. She slumped against the cabin wall, staring at the impossible sight before her. Father said you died in a carriage accident when I was 9. Elena's laugh was bitter and sharp. Your father said many things, most of them lies. The truth is, I left to protect you from what was coming. And what was coming was him selling you to pay his gambling debt. The story poured out in Elena's calm, measured voice while gunfire continued outside. Richard wasn't Maple's real father. He was Elena's second husband, who had married her for her inheritance, then systematically destroyed her mining fortune through bad investments and worse gambling habits. But you were just a child, Elena continued, moving to embrace her stunned daughter. When I discovered his plan to use you as collateral for his debts to some very dangerous people, I had to act fast. So I faked my death and disappeared. Maple felt like she was drowning in revelations. Everything she thought she knew about her life was crumbling away like sand. But I've been watching over you all these years, Elena said, her eyes finding Ezra with obvious approval. When I learned about this marriage arrangement, I investigated your husband thoroughly. He's a good man, Maple. The only good thing to come out of this whole terrible situation. Ezra moved closer to both women, his rifle ready but his expression showing he wasn't surprised by Elena's appearance. You're Elena Blackwood, he said with recognition in his voice, the original owner of the Sunset Ridge mining claims. My maiden name was Elena Blackwood, she confirmed, looking at Maple meaningfully. Ezra is my nephew, darling. My sister's boy. This marriage wasn't arranged by your stepfamily at all, it was arranged by me. The revelation sent shockwaves through Maple's understanding of everything. Her husband was her cousin by marriage. Her supposedly dead mother had orchestrated her rescue from an abusive household. Every assumption she'd made about being unwanted, being a burden, being thrown away, all lies. Outside, the gunfire had stopped, but voices were still shouting. Through the broken windows, Maple could see that Elena hadn't come alone. Well-dressed men in fine suits were taking control of the situation, clearly acting on Elena's orders. The mining claims your stepfamily thought they could access through your marriage, Elena explained, settling beside her daughter. They rightfully belong to our family, the Blackwood family. Richard never had any legal claim to them, and neither did his debts. By marrying Ezra, you didn't give them access to his wealth. You claimed your rightful inheritance. The emotional whiplash was almost too much to bear. In one conversation, Maple had gone from unwanted burden to wealthy heiress, from punishment marriage to love match, from orphan to daughter of a living mother who had been protecting her all along. But why didn't you just take me away when I was a child? Maple asked, tears streaming down her face. Why let me suffer all those years of their cruelty? Elena's face filled with pain and regret. Because running away with you would have made us both fugitives. Richard had legal custody, and he had connections with people who would have hunted us down. I needed time to build a case, to gather evidence of his abuse and fraud, and I needed you to be safe while I did it. She placed a leather portfolio in Maple's trembling hands. These are the deeds to the original Blackwood mining empire, she said. 47 silver mines, 3 processing facilities, and mineral rights across 4 territories. As my only heir and Ezra's wife, they're all yours now. The weight of the documents felt enormous, but not as enormous as the weight of understanding what they meant. Maple wasn't just wealthy, she was one of the most powerful landowners in the territory. Your stepfamily approached Ezra, thinking they were cleverly marrying you off to a poor farmer, Elena continued. They had no idea they were actually delivering you to your own family, your own inheritance, and a man who would love you for exactly who you are. Ezra knelt beside Maple, taking her free hand in his. I've known who you were from the beginning, he said gently. Elena contacted me months ago, told me about her daughter who was being abused and used. She asked if I would be willing to marry you to get you away from them. And I said yes immediately. He continued, his amber eyes intense with emotion. Not as a favor to Elena, not for business reasons, but because everything she told me about your kindness, your strength, your gentle heart made me want to meet you. And when I did meet you, he smiled, I knew I'd found the person I'd been waiting for my whole life. The confession should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt like coming home. Everything made sense now. Ezra's immediate kindness, the expensive tools and quality construction, the mysterious visitors, the mining operation. He hadn't been hiding his wealth from her. He'd been protecting her inheritance until she was ready to claim it. So my family really did think they were punishing me, Maple said, a laugh bubbling up through her tears. They thought they were throwing you away, Elena confirmed. Instead, they gave you everything you were always meant to have. The irony was perfect and complete. In their greed and cruelty, Richard and Vivian had handed Maple the keys to an empire while thinking they were getting rid of a problem. But their conversation was interrupted by pounding on the cabin door. A voice Maple didn't recognize called out urgently, "Mrs. Blackwood, we've secured the area, but we have a situation. One of the attackers is claiming to have information about threats against your daughter's life. Says there are others coming who won't be stopped by legal documents or hired security." Elena's face went grim. "Pike," she said simply. "Who's Pike?" Maple asked. "The man who's been hunting our family for 30 years, Elena replied, already moving toward the door. "And if he's finally found us, then everything we've built here is about to be tested." As they prepared to face whatever new threat awaited outside, Maple realized that discovering her true identity and inheritance was only the beginning. The real test would be whether she was strong enough to protect what was now hers, and whether the love she'd found with Ezra could survive the dangerous world she'd just inherited. The threat came from the last person Maple expected to see emerging from the forest shadows. Pike, the gruff wagon driver who had brought her to the cabin weeks ago. But now he stood with a rifle trained not on Ezra or Elena, but directly at Maple herself. 30 years I've been waiting for this moment," Pike said, his voice shaking with decades of rage. 30 years since your family destroyed mine." Elena stepped protectively in front of her daughter, but Pike's weapon never wavered. "You remember me, don't you, Elena? Tom Pike. My family were the original miners who found silver in these mountains, long before your father came along with his fancy legal papers." The story unfolded in bitter, clipped sentences. Pike's family had been working small claims in the area for years when Elena's father arrived with territorial surveys and government backing. What Pike called theft, the law had called legitimate business. "My father offered to buy out your claims for fair market value," Elena said calmly, though Maple could see tension in every line of her body. "Your family refused, said the land was worth more than any price he could offer, because we knew what was down there." Pike snarled. "We'd found the mother lode, the vein that made all this possible, but we were simple folk, couldn't afford lawyers and fancy documents. So your father used his connections to have our claims declared invalid." Ezra moved slowly to Maple's other side, his own rifle ready. "The territorial records show the Pike family was fairly compensated for their mining rights," he said carefully. "Compensated?" Pike's laugh was harsh and broken. "A few $100 for claims worth millions. And when we tried to fight it in court, we lost everything, our land, our savings, our future. My father died a broken man, and my mother," his voice cracked, "she never got over losing everything we'd worked for." Maple felt a stab of sympathy despite the gun pointed at her. Pike's pain was real, his loss genuine. But Elena's response surprised her. "Tom," she said gently, reaching into her coat, "what if I told you that everything you believed about what happened was wrong?" She produced a folder thick with yellow documents. These are the original transaction records from 1848. Your father wasn't cheated. He was paid exactly what he asked for. $3,000, which was a fortune back then. Pike's face went pale as Elena continued. The problem wasn't the price, Tom. The problem was what your father did with the money. The gambling debts, the bad investments, the drinking. By the time he realized his mistakes, the money was gone and he needed someone to blame. You're lying, Pike whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Lena handed him the documents. Look for yourself. Your father's signature on the sales agreement. The bank records showing the deposit. The witness statements confirming he was paid in full. As Pike read, his weapon slowly lowered. The truth was there in black and white. His family hadn't been cheated by the backwoods. They'd been destroyed by his father's poor choices and addiction to gambling. He told us we were robbed, Pike said, his voice hollow. He made us believe, he said, the Blackwoods stole our birthright. Your father was a good man who made bad choices, Elena said compassionately. But he was also a proud man who couldn't admit his mistakes to his family. It was easier to blame us than to face what he'd done. The revelation broke something fundamental in Pike. 30 years of hatred, 30 years of planning revenge, all based on a lie his father had told to protect his own reputation. I've wasted my whole life, he said, staring at the documents. Everything I've done, everyone I've hurt. It was all for nothing. But Maple barely heard Pike's confession because she was watching the tree line behind him. More figures were emerging from the forest, and these weren't Elena's security men. Mother, she said urgently, pointing to the new arrivals. Elena's face went grim as she recognized the newcomers. Federal marshals, she said quietly. Someone called in a report about illegal mining operations and armed conflict. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing Richard and Vivian emerge from behind the marshals, their faces wearing expressions of desperate triumph. There, Vivian called out, pointing at Elena. That's the woman who faked her death to avoid prosecution for mining fraud. She's been hiding here all these years. The lead marshal, a stern man with a badge that gleamed in the afternoon sun, studied the scene carefully. Ma'am, he said to Elena, we've received serious allegations about fraudulent death certificates and illegal mining operations. I'm going to need to see some identification. Elena's composure never cracked. Of course, Marshal, but first you might want to see these. She produced another set of documents from her seemingly endless supply of legal papers. Presidential mining grant, she said calmly. Signed by President Fillmore himself in 1851. Federal territory mining rights supersede all local claims and investigations. Any operations under this grant are under federal protection, not local jurisdiction. The marshal examined the documents with growing amazement. Ma'am, this grant gives you mining rights to half the territory and immunity from local prosecution for any mining-related activities. It does indeed, Elena confirmed, which means any charges your local authorities might want to file are outside their jurisdiction. Richard's face went from confident to panicked. That can't be legal. She's been dead for 10 years. Actually, the marshal said, studying Elena's identification papers. According to federal records, Elena Blackwood has been filing annual mining reports and paying federal taxes continuously for the past decade. She was never declared dead in our system. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Maple. Her mother hadn't just faked her death, she'd only faked it locally while maintaining her federal identity and business operations. It was a brilliant strategy that kept her legally alive where it mattered while protecting her from Richard's schemes. So you see, Elena said, turning to address her former husband and stepdaughter, not only do you have no legal claim on my daughter or her marriage, But you've just committed federal crimes by filing false reports and attempting to interfere with protected mining operations. The marshal nodded grimly. I'm afraid I'll need to arrest Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell for filing false federal reports and conspiracy to commit fraud. As Richard and Vivian were led away in shackles, their desperate protests echoing through the forest, Maple finally understood the full scope of what her mother had accomplished. Elena hadn't just saved her from an abusive family, she'd built an unassailable legal fortress around everything they'd inherited. "Is it over?" Maple asked, watching her tormentors disappear into the trees. "The legal threats are over," Elena confirmed, "but there's still one more thing you need to know." She turned to face her daughter with an expression that mixed love, pride, and just a hint of mischief. "The Blackwood mining empire isn't just silver mines and processing facilities, darling. We also own the largest diamond mine west of the Mississippi River. You're not just wealthy, Maple, you're one of the richest women in America." The words hung in the air, like stars, suddenly appearing in daylight. Maple stared at her mother, trying to process this final, overwhelming revelation. One of the richest women in America. The girl who had been thrown away as worthless was now worth more than most people could dream of. But as the shock wore off, Maple realized something that surprised her. The money, the mines, the empire, none of it mattered as much as the man standing beside her, holding her hand with gentle strength. "I don't care about the diamonds," she said quietly, looking into Ezra's amber eyes. "I don't care about being rich or powerful. I just care about being loved." Ezra's smile was radiant. "Good," he said, pulling her into his arms, "because that's exactly what you have. Today, tomorrow, and for the rest of our lives." The kiss that followed was everything their relationship had been building toward, tender, passionate, and full of promises for the future. When they broke apart, Maple felt transformed, not by wealth or status, but by the certainty that she was finally completely loved for who she truly was. Around them, Elena's security team was finishing the cleanup. Pike had surrendered peacefully and was being escorted away, his decades of misguided anger finally spent. The federal marshals were documenting the scene and preparing their reports. The immediate dangers were over. "So what happens now?" Maple asked, looking between her mother and her husband. "Now," Elena said with satisfaction, "you get to choose. You can run the mining operations yourself, or hire managers and live however you want. You can stay in this cabin or build a mansion. You can be a public figure or remain private. For the first time in your life, darling, every choice is yours." The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. Maple had never been allowed to make her own decisions before. The weight of infinite possibilities felt heavier than any responsibility. "What do you want to do?" Ezra asked gently, understanding her uncertainty. Maple looked around at the simple cabin that had become home, at the garden they'd planted together, at the peaceful clearing where she'd found happiness for the first time. Then she looked at the man who had seen her worth when no one else could. "I want to stay here," she said firmly. "I want to keep living simply, keep growing our garden, keep having quiet evenings on the porch. The money can help people, fund schools and hospitals, but I don't need luxury, I need love, and I have that." Ezra's expression was pure joy. "Are you sure? You could have anything now. Grand houses, fine clothes, travel anywhere in the world." "I could," Maple agreed, stepping closer to him. "But I'd rather have breakfast with you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I'd rather watch our children play in this yard and grow old together on that porch swing." The mention of children made both their faces light up with possibility. A future together, building a family based on love rather than obligation or convenience. "Children who will never doubt their worth," Ezra said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "Children who will know they're loved exactly as they are." "Our children," Maple corrected, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. This man would be a wonderful father, just as he'd proven himself to be a wonderful husband. Elena watched their exchange with tears in her eyes. "You know," she said, "when I planned this whole elaborate rescue, I hoped you'd find safety and security. I never dared dream you'd find this kind of happiness." "Thank you," Maple said, embracing her mother. "For everything. For saving me. For protecting our inheritance. For bringing me to him." "Thank you for surviving," Elena replied, holding her daughter tight. "For keeping your kindness despite their cruelty. For becoming the woman I always knew you could be." As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the clearing in golden light, the last of the officials and security personnel departed. Finally, Maple and Ezra were alone again, standing in front of their cabin as husband and wife, but now with the full knowledge of who they really were. "So," Ezra said with a grin, "how does it feel to be married to your cousin?" Maple laughed, the sound bright and free. "Considering we're not blood relatives and it's perfectly legal, it feels like the best kind of fairy tale, the kind where the princess saves herself and gets the prince too." "Actually," Ezra said, pulling her close, "I think I'm the one who got saved. Before you came here, I had money and success but no real purpose. Now I have someone to build a life with, someone who makes every day worth living." As they stood together in the doorway of their home, their real home chosen freely and defended successfully, Maple reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here. 6 weeks ago she'd been a frightened, unwanted girl being shipped off as punishment. Now she was a confident woman who knew her own worth, married to a man who cherished her, with the resources to make a real difference in the world. Her family had thought they were destroying her by sending her away. Instead, they'd given her everything she'd never known she wanted: true love, real family, and the strength to claim her rightful place in the world. "I love you," she whispered against Ezra's lips as he kissed her again. "I love you too," he replied, holding her close. "My wife, my partner, my heart." Behind them, the cabin glowed warm and welcoming in the gathering dusk. Their garden stretched green and growing toward the forest. Somewhere in the distance, the mining operations continued their steady work, generating wealth that would fund hospitals, schools, and opportunities for others who needed a chance. But here, in this peaceful clearing, two people who had found each other against all odds settled into their chosen life together. The obese girl who had been married off as punishment had indeed discovered what her husband owned thousands of, but it wasn't just silver mines or diamonds. He owned thousands of moments like this one. Thousands of quiet evenings and gentle mornings, thousands of shared laughs and whispered promises, thousands of days to love and be loved in return. And that, Maple knew as she watched the first stars appear overhead, was the greatest treasure of all. The story of her punishment had become the story of her triumph. Every cruel word, every moment of rejection, every tear shed in loneliness had led her to this moment of perfect contentment. Her family thought they were throwing her away. Instead, they had given her everything she never knew she wanted, and she would spend the rest of her life grateful for their cruelty, because it had brought her home. What an incredible journey. Maple went from being called worthless to becoming one of the most powerful women in America. Sometimes the worst punishments lead to the greatest blessings. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from. I love connecting with amazing people around the world. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button and subscribe to spread more kindness and hope. There's another incredible story waiting for you right on your screen. Click it now to keep the inspiration going. Remember, you are worthy of love exactly as you are. See you in the next story.